Welcome to another edition of In the Weeds with Ikard and Lehman, presented by Riverwind Casino. Riverwind is Oklahoma City's premier casino experience, and there are so many reasons why Riverwind is consistently voted OKC's number one casino, but it all starts with their amazing variety of gaming thrills and excitement. Riverwind's beautiful award-winning environment plays host to more than 2,800 of the latest electronic games with a huge selection of table games, including blackjack match, roulette, and Teddy's favorite, craps. No matter what your game, Riverwind has it in spades and hearts. And to learn more about their gaming promotions and entertainment options, all you got to do is visit riverwind.com. Riverwind Casino, good times, great rewards, and it is our pleasure to be joined by the co-host of Dusty and Danny in the morning on SiriusXM. He also is one of the mainstays of the Cover 3 podcast. You can see him on CBS Sports HQ and far and wide. He is known as the biggest OU softball hater out there. Danny Kanell is in the house. DK, what's up, man?
What is up, fellas? It's great to be on with you. Yes, I've drawn the ire of many an Oklahoma softball fan, but Florida State's head coach, Lonnie Alameda, is an Oklahoma Sooner, and she has done a phenomenal job of building up our program to where it at least can kind of compete at times with the Sooners. So I guess there is a debt of gratitude to pay to the Oklahoma Sooners softball program, which has been phenomenal. But it's good to be on with you guys.
Yeah, you got to be careful. You could trash our football team. You talk about the salt. You've got to watch out. You better watch out.
That is true. I didn't know that. I mean, that fan base is rabid. They were coming for me. I was like, it was when we were playing Florida State was playing Oklahoma. Like, of course, I'm going to take my Seminoles side in that matchup and do anything I can to try to support them. So, yeah, but I learned a lesson there. Like, and it'll come back. Like, I'll be sitting here in, May, and I'll have some random, all of a sudden this random flurry of tweets coming in. It's from Oklahoma softball fans reminding me about one blowout they had or a Florida State loss or a celebration. Something went wrong. They just have to remind me about that.
I don't know if those are ever going away, DK.
No, they won't. Honest. It's eternity.
Until you release an official apology to the program and all the fans. No, but hey, wanted to have you on clearly to talk about the college football playoff and the title game. But before we jump into that, this is our first college football season with the 12-team playoff, and a lot of people were worried about how that would affect the way that the regular season felt. What did you think? What did you think of how the regular season felt with this new postseason format for college football?
I thought it was awesome. Now I might be biased too, because I was one that was kind of pushing for this for probably a decade. I mean, going way back to when we had the BCS, I was like, get us more. And we got 4, which I felt was better than 2. And then we went from 4 to 12. I was kind of, again, like saying, let's go 4. And I thought we'd go to 8. And then all of a sudden they kind of surprised me, went to 12. But I do think the way that it was designed, there still is value in the regular season. So I was fully on board. I thought the month of November was thoroughly entertaining. I thought the whole season was entertaining. I still thought you saw losses hurt, which a lot of people thought the regular season would be diminished. But probably the biggest success story was, since I've covered the sport, you could come into the preseason and you could throw a net around 7 or 8 teams and be like, all right, those are the teams that can make the playoff and probably win it. Maybe 10 or 12. But with the 12-team playoff, we were on the last week of the season, and you could go in the top 25 alone, and you get down to around 20, 21, where there were still programs that had a chance to make the college football playoff. Now, maybe they couldn't have won it, and we saw some of those teams with an early exit to the playoff, but it gave a lot of programs hope. It gave them interest when they're still in the conference championship races. Even if it's a long shot, it's like, man, if we could just get in, we could have a chance to play for a national championship. I thought that was huge. For a long time, the sport itself was kind of going to the southeast portion of the country, and it was the West Coast was completely forgotten about. So I just think it's become more national, which is healthy. I think it's improved the regular season, which is great. And I know people want to, complain about everything in our sport. The first round would have liked competitive matchups. Of course, I would have liked those, but I think that's one of the reasons we got great semifinal games is because you saw some of those teams maybe that weren't national championship ready exit early. And so you get the true best of the best on the national stage when it matters, much like you kind of see in the NFL, as we saw from Wild Card Weekend, was a little bit ugly as well.
Yeah, I know that the seeding was really the biggest issue. I mean, I know some teams thought they should have been in, but that's the good thing. Whenever you start losing 3 games, you got much less of a claim. So that stuff wasn't all that loud, but some of the seeding with the automatic bye for the conference champion. Do you think there's any tweaks made after this year before next year, or are they going to ride this format out until the first 2 years like we had thought, and then whatever changes are going to happen then?
Teddy, I think they're going to go another year. I wish they wouldn't, because, I mean, anybody with common sense who covers the sport and is, passionate about the sport looked at the seeding versus the rankings and was like, this doesn't make much sense. Probably the biggest issue I had with was Boise State, a group of 5 team, getting a first round bye. Like, that is a different level. And I am somebody who has always been like a champion for the group of 5. Like, I want them to have a chance to play for a national championship. I want them to have a seat at the table. I just didn't expect them to have one of the heads of the table, right? Which is essentially what they got.
I don't even think the designers thought that.
No.
Whenever this thing unfolded, they were like, damn it. We
Right.
did not want that.
No, they did not see that at all. And then there was like the quick discussion was they're going to visit this, after 1 year and potentially look at changes, but it has to be unanimous by the conference commissioners. So if you're the group of 5 representative in that room, if you're the ACC representative in that room, if you're the Big 12 representative in that room, like the conferences that it worked out pretty good for, like Arizona State getting a bye, that didn't make any sense. They weren't one of the top 4 teams, but they were one of the highest ranked, conference champs. They get it. So do you want to relinquish that opportunity for 1 more year to get the bye and to have get that advance? No. So I hate that it has to be unanimous. So I think that's going to get in the way. And how many times, like, I thought the 12-team playoff was going to be awesome the minute it was announced. You guys remember? That was like 3 years ago, or 4 years ago. We had to wait to get it because the contract had to run out. Unfortunately, I think this is one where we're going to have to wait another year for this 2-year experiment to run its course, just because our sport, which we love, very rarely uses common sense. It's just always, there's a process and it's annoying. And it's not usually always the best interest of the sport, but it's just kind of the way it goes.
Isn't the bureaucracy of college football just absolutely beautiful, DK?
Yes, that's a perfect way to put it.
Beautiful.
It is.
It's a beautiful mess. Now, looking at the games that we've had up to this point, has there been anything that has really surprised you? Has there been anything where you went, man, I really did not see that coming?
Because
all the favorites have won.
Right. And my man Dusty, he keeps bragging about his flawless bracket, and I'm like, well, you picked every favorite, so you really haven't caught any limbs there that he's gone through. But you're right, the favorites have won. I think that would probably be the surprise, and also the blowouts. Like, I thought that there was more parity, and I still do. I think there was more parity in this year of college football. So I was surprised at the blowouts in the first round. And even like the SMU Penn State game, I think was kind of closer than the score let on. Like, Kevin Jennings had a couple picks. Like, that just, once it starts snowballing on you, I thought they would have been better if their quarterback didn't make a couple boneheaded mistakes. They dropped a 4th and 1 touchdown pass early, but it happens. Like, and it was a blowout. So there's no denying that. But I thought some of the first round games would have been better. I also think we always talk about home field advantage, but I think you saw the importance of it and what an impact it can truly make, even more so at our level at college football than the NFL. Like, and I watched a lot of those wild card games this past weekend. You can't feel the energy and the excitement and the crowd noise the way you can in college football. And I think that's going to only continue to be an emphasis that home field matters, and it makes a huge difference, because when you are faced with adversity, when your quarterback does throw a pick 6 early, or an interception early like Indiana did against Notre Dame, like that does keep the crowd into it, and college players are a little less likely to be able to overcome that adversity. So I would say the blowouts and the lack of upsets have probably been the more surprising thing, but they'll happen eventually. It is kind of sports, but I think that's probably the thing that surprised me the most.
Yeah, well, I'll admit I was surprised by Ohio State. Going into that first game with Tennessee, it was like, oh boy, here we go, Tennessee. Ohio State's coming off the loss to Michigan. They're facing an SEC team. A lot of people had that as an upset, and they rolled them. And then they rolled Oregon. They look like a totally different team. Now, there'd been some flashes throughout the year, but in those two back-to-back games, they looked unstoppable.
Teddy, the Tennessee one was kind of surprising, but Nico was a young quarterback playing on the road, kind of what we talked about. The Rose Bowl against Oregon, that was the biggest shock to me. That was the biggest surprising outcome because we had seen Oregon go toe-to-toe with Ohio State. We saw them beat them in Eugene, and it was a close game. But I was banking on that game being a classic, like an all-time, here we go, biggest stage, tight game in the fourth quarter, and it was anything but. I mean, there's a stat that has been out there. Oregon's offensive line gave up 12 sacks on the entire season, and in the Rose Bowl, they gave up 8 sacks. Like, that is mind-blowing to see the type of dominance that Ohio State had in that game. So you bring that, like, that game in its own was probably the biggest surprising outcome because, and I think Ohio State's run, what they've been doing, like, I'm sure you guys have experienced these before, and I don't know if any Ohio State fan would ever describe losing to Michigan as a good loss, but there are losses that can kind of wake you up. Like if it's early in the season, think of Ohio State 2014. They lost to Virginia Tech early, like week 2, and it was kind of ugly, and people were like, this team's not ready. That was the year they came back and they played with 3 quarterbacks and Cardell Jones, and they ran through Bama and won the national championship. I don't know if the Michigan loss flipped some switch in them or it galvanized them to have a us against the world mentality, or it brought their intensity level, because why wouldn't they bring that into the Michigan game? They had lost 3 previous years, but for whatever reason, maybe it was the coaching staff who I thought coached very conservatively against Michigan. Maybe it opened them up to say, you know what? Let's utilize all these weapons we have on offense. Let's get more aggressive and call more blitzes on defense. But that loss, as hard as it seems, like it's a good loss that kind of woke them up and woke up this Ohio State team to kind of achieve what people thought it was capable of.
Let's dive into the national title game. But first,
you listen to this podcast to get insight from the guys who played the game. Why don't you take that same approach when it comes to buying your beef? When you order from Didier Ranch, you're getting your beef directly from the people who raise it. A rancher knows what it takes to have a premium quality beef. Tasty beef. Didier Ranch has done it for over 100 years right here in Oklahoma. From delicious 21-day dry-aged ribeyes to savory steak burgers, there's no better place to get your beef. Get your beef from the guys who've done it and use code Oklahoma15 for 15% off on DidierRanch.com. Didier Ranch, tradition tastes better.
Let's start with one right in the wheelhouse for you, DK. Looking at Notre Dame and Ohio State, who do you think has the advantage at quarterback?
I think I want to say easy, but I think it's Will Howard. But I think you have to consider the weapons that he's working with. I think like all encompassing. But even if it was a playground, like, hey, you're out in the playground and you're picking your teams, I would probably pick Will Howard first. I think he's a more polished passer. Riley Leonard is perfect for what Notre Dame wants him to do. He's a mobile quarterback who's going to run the football a lot. He's not going to beat you throwing for 300 plus yards down the field. It's just, if they have to do that, they're probably going to lose. But like I said, he's pretty good with the football. He doesn't put it in harm's way. But the edge, I think, has to go to Will Howard, he's got a Big 12 championship under his belt when he was back at Kansas State. He's working with all these uber talented, players, maybe the best wide receiver in the country, and Jeremiah Smith. And then you throw in Emeka Ibuka, and they have in the backfield. They have talent everywhere. So I think it's kind of the combination of those is why I said easy Will Howard for me as far as who's the advantage at QB.
Now, whenever you think about, it's kind of like the Michigan Ohio State game. Michigan does a really good job of dragging Ohio State into their style of play. And I don't know
Yep.
how they accomplish it every year, but they do it. Is that kind of how you feel like Notre Dame has to do this? Like it's got to be a little bit more of a slugfest, slower paced game.
Definitely. They got to pull them in the slop, like just bring them down, make it slow. I think pace of the game is one thing that, again, talking about Riley Leonard, they don't want to throw the football because if you do, incomplete passes, stop the clock. Well, if you have long, sustained drives with occasional chunk plays, 15 to 20-yard gain, but you're running the football and your quarterback is running the football, that's one way to slow down that offense that Ohio State has is by keeping it away from them. And, you guys, I'm sure you guys have faced this either playing on or playing against teams that go tempo that have a lot of offensive success. When I was in college, we were running tempo all the time. And it can be very frustrating because if you do have success, if you get, or if you don't, if you have a 3-and-out and the other team holds the ball for an 8-9 minute drive, it feels like forever. And so you go back on the field and you kind of have to get back in the flow of the game. I think that is something that is very real. I was especially a player who's kind of rhythm based. Like I liked all right, I know I'm going to back on the field. Here we go. Let's start this thing back up. If you're over there having to throw balls to keep your arm loose because it's been a while, that can be very frustrating. And that's across the board. Receivers are starting to stretch. They want to catch. So I think that absolutely is the game that they want to try to do. And they've been able to do it. Now, the Georgia game probably unfolded the way they wanted to, but Georgia's kind of was similar, without Carson Beck, they wanted to run the football. They didn't have much passing game. Penn State, they were a run first based team. So it worked really well for Notre Dame. This is one where the matchup, can they do that? Can they make the game dictate the tempo and the time of possession? Because Ohio State's an entirely different animal with the offense they run and the weapons they have to be able to throw at them.
Do you think Notre Dame's defense can play the way that they've played the majority of the season, a little more aggressive, a lot of man coverage in the back end? Do you think they can do that in this game and challenge Ohio State?
I don't think
they
so.
Got a bunch of NFL players back
they
there,
do,
Danny, but that
do.
Ohio State wide receiver core is ridiculous.
Right. And you just really put your players on an island when you put them one-on-one with a Jeremiah Smith or when you put them one-on-one with an Ibuka or Carnell Tate or whoever it is. I think you have to pick your spots, right? Texas, I thought, laid out a game plan which worked really well for them. And they were right there. They were first and goal with tying up the game. We're talking about overtime potentially. They only allowed Jeremiah Smith one catch. They didn't give up the super long play. The first drive, Ohio State went right down the field, and you're like, oh my gosh, this game's going to be another blowout for Ohio State. Then, they kind of got their wits about them, kind of settled down in the game, saw some of those new formations, were able to adjust. I think this is one, and I said this going into the game against Texas, and I would say the same thing for Notre Dame. It's okay. You're going to give up chunk plays. You're going to give up some sustained drives. But if you can get red zone stops and prevent the big play, the explosives, then you can survive. You just can't have what happened to Oregon when Jeremiah Smith is just going off and he's got 150 receiving yards in the first quarter and a half. You just have to survive that initial onslaught. And I don't think doing that is just saying, all right, we're going to trust our best against their best, because as good as Notre Dame is, I think Ohio State has that advantage. And don't forget, when you're playing man, it's not only trusting your best defender against Jeremiah Smith, then it's your second best defender against their second best, and so on down the road, where I just think you give them a little bit too much of an advantage. Now, pick your spots. If you want to be aggressive and blitz and pick an island there, then go ahead and try it. But I think that's what they'll do. And Al Golden is probably one of the more underrated coordinators in this playoff. And we saw what he's capable of doing, throughout this run. But yeah, so I think it's one where you kind of play a little bit more bend, don't break, and don't be too aggressive, which I'm all for aggressiveness and bringing the blitz and taking those opportunities. I think you got to be really selective, and hopefully you can confuse Will Howard, maybe get to him before he can get it off. Because if you guess and you blitz and they pull it and they max protect, or Howard knows exactly where to go with the football, you're going to get burned.
If you have to pick one player on each team that has to have a huge night for them to win, who would you go with?
Um, I'll say I'll say Jeremiah Love for Notre Dame because like Riley Leonard, I don't like they can win and he might rush for 75, 80 yards, which is really good for a quarterback, but I don't think anybody's gonna be blown away by that. And I think he could throw for 1 or 2 touchdowns. Again, like I don't see a script where he has to play the role of hero, but I do think if Notre Dame wants to win, I think Jeremiah Love, and maybe by extension because he's been hurt, it's just their backfield. Like they've got to run the football with some success against Ohio State's defense. And then for Ohio State, for them to win, I do think Will Howard would have to play great. So I'll go with Will Howard, the QB, because I do
Feels
think
like the difference in the games where they've looked incredible. He has been
sensational. Totally agree. In Michigan, he had 2 interceptions, and that was kind of, even the Penn State game, which they didn't win as much, he had the pick 6 early, and they were down 10-0 early, so it kind of played them. So, yeah, I would say Ohio State needs to play as good as, like, he has to have the great game for Ohio State, because if he struggles, as much talent as they have, it is more of a quarterback-driven offense.
Currently, the Buckeyes are an 8-point favorite. Total is 45.5. Now, I'm not trying to steal the Locks Pod's content, okay?
Right.
But do you have any leans looking at the spread and looking at the over/under?
So I don't like the point spread. I think it's really tight. Like I totally get it. If you're like Ohio State's going to run through them, I get it. I feel like I'm trying to talk myself into the style of game that can get Notre Dame the cover because I kind of lean towards Notre Dame, but I'm also like subconsciously I want to see a close game. So I'm like, man, am I just talking myself into it? So I think the safest play is the under. Because I think you have 2 things. One, if Notre Dame's able to drag them down in the mud with them and have this ugly defensive game, that's great. Like that's their way to, and they possibly could cover. But I also think if it does get sideways, if Notre Dame struggles and Ohio State puts up some points, I think it might be like a 35-7, type of game, 35-10. But I don't think it's going to be a repeat of Georgia TCU, where all of a sudden, Georgia covered the total on their own by putting up 60 points. Like, I think Notre Dame will be able to at least slow them down somewhat. So I think you're kind of protected if you take the under versus a blowout. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think
so,
you're just
my
saying,
favorite play is the under. Because I do think,
you're trusting Notre Dame's defense to be really,
at
really
least
good.
Adequate. Yeah. And that could
season.
be a really bad game by their standards, giving up 35 points. And then if it does get dominant, because normally you would worry about maybe a backdoor cover where Notre Dame is just not designed to come from behind. As great as Riley Leonard has been awesome, I do think he has his limitations as a passer. He's been very efficient. He's been very good. But if they have to start chucking it around, I think they're not going to score very many points. That's why I think the initial first quarter, which was the same in the Texas game, they took the first blow and were able to survive it. They didn't give up the second drive. That's something I think that is key in this game too. How does Notre Dame do defensively versus that offensive explosion?
What do you think of these 2 teams as a champion? Like whenever you compare them to past years, I guess I'm kind of asking, did the NIL and transfer portal kill the super teams? Because we've seen unstoppable LSU, unstoppable Alabama, these teams that just have so much talent that they're incredible and there's no way anyone's going to beat them. This year it felt like, you kind of pointed out there's a little more parity. How do these teams compare to the past, and is this kind of the new normal? Is this a one-off year?
I think it's the new normal because I do think the NIL and the transfer portal combined has really spread out some of the talent. And I know it's something I've alluded to a bunch. Like historically, the SEC was always paying guys under the table. So and the teams were able to kind of monopolize the talent, the teams at the top. And I know Florida State, people always take shots at Florida State. Maybe we were, maybe we weren't. I don't know. I never got any money. I wish I had, especially now. I'm like, where was that money when I would have taken all the money under the table if I would have known it was all coming eventually. But it's always been the way it's been. The teams that kind of cheated and were able to gain the most talent had the biggest edge. Now everybody has a chance. Like that's how Indiana, by the way, their NIL is pretty solid. Like they've been able to buy a competitor, which they never were before. SMU, they have a desperate, a mindset of we want to be competitive. So they spend it, they spread it around. But to your question, Teddy, about like where, like, is the super team over? I don't, because if, think how quickly this will change if Ohio State blows out Notre Dame the way they did Tennessee and the way they did Oregon. Then all of a sudden it's, oh, this is one of those super teams, right? They had the $20 million roster. So I think it probably, and even with the new, model, the rev share model we're going to, collectives aren't going away. So like, I think there's always going to be an opportunity for a team to rise to the top. But I think, that's a good question. I haven't given it much thought. I think there could be, because again, like Ohio State might be that super team, but they did lose to Michigan, and we didn't see that with 2019 LSU or 2020 Bama. So yeah, I hope not. But there's always going to be somebody that kind of defies the odds and comes together, and there's always the potential to potentially buy a super team. Which if Ohio State wins, it will look like they have done that.
You got time for one more?
Yeah.
I hate how much I like Marcus Freeman. How has this guy managed to make Notre Dame a likable program? I feel like we all were in agreement. And I almost went to Notre Dame. I was going to Notre Dame if I didn't go to OU. And I don't know. It's just he's performed some type of magic trick.
Yes.
It's ridiculous.
First of all, he's probably one of the most genuinely like good guys out there. I remember the first time I interviewed him was like the week he took the Notre Dame job. And as soon as we were done with the interview, I was like, that guy's going to be an NFL head coach. Like just impressive as it gets. And I think if you're Notre Dame, you're probably genuinely worried about that. And I know the Bears have come calling and they're kind of poking and prodding, seeing if he potentially would leave. If he wants to do that, I think it's there for him. But he also like, have you noticed how he did not get into the war of words with Kirk Cignetti? Like, because Kirk Cignetti was talking a lot of trash. He even alluded to something this past week about, talking trash. And he was just like, I'd rather let my actions do the talking. Like, he's humble. There's a humility about him that just is more of a business, or like, I just want to go to work. I think he's created a culture which kind of defies the odds. He pointed out coming into this playoff, they were the only team in the 12-team playoff that didn't have one player hit the portal before the season was over. Like they still might after the season, but they didn't have any early exits. Nobody entered the portal. And then you know what else I think he's done is he's found players that buy into his culture. And maybe it's a character, maybe he's a really good judge of character, but like the players are likable too. Like Riley Leonard has this innocence about him that's just incredibly likable. Some of his defensive players, like when you hear his players talk, they all kind of take on the personality of Marcus Freeman. So they're kind of humble and they just want to work and they want to be a part of a team. Jeremiah Love going out there playing with a knee brace, and they told him not to jump and he's hurdling guys and carrying guys in the end zone. Like, I think all of it comes together, and it's because of Marcus Freeman, but it comes together and they somehow feel like an underdog story when they're probably the biggest brand the sport has ever known. So like it's all kind of this perfect storm of them going against, and then you've got Ohio State fans who want to fire Ryan Day because he doesn't win a national championship. So it's kind of this perfect storm where I think Marcus Freeman, he's awesome, but it's also kind of this whole perfect storm of events which have made Notre Dame likable, which is kind of crazy.
Sometimes you can tell how good a head coach is by how little they do on game day.
Yeah.
Like let their coaches coach, and he just basically stands there like this the entire time. It doesn't look like he moves or says anything. And the way that those players reacted whenever he was named coach, I think tells you a lot about him.
Totally. And the way like Riley Leonard wrote a piece for the Players Tribune, and he was talking about the game against Northern Illinois, and he was really down, and he like Marcus Freeman, the conversation that we had that he revealed to in this letter was like, Marcus Freeman was like, no, you're still the leader of this team. We can still, like, it was there's a calmness about him, like a peace that I think is exactly what you're talking about, Teddy. Like on the sidelines, you never see him really screaming at the refs, screaming at players. Like some coaches are frenetic, and there's more ways to win national championship. Nick Saban, the greatest ever, was always screaming at somebody to have them. But I think kind of the calmness that he shows, and there's like a quiet confidence that's kind of that would almost intimidate me more as an opponent. Like if I saw a coach or another player like screaming at each other, I was like, oh, good, we got him right where we want him. I would be almost more intimidated to play the coach and the team like his that's just composed, even if they're down 10. It's like they're just kind of gearing up for something special to happen. And that's what it does feel like with that program.
DK, you're the man. We'll have to have you on again so you can tell us everything's going to be okay with OU football. That's
I will do that for sure, but I was like, maybe we'll preview a little softball season. We could do that.
Yeah.
Getting that home field advantage.
I believe this is going to start the healing process between you.
All right,
and
delete that
softball.
last line when I said they have the biggest home field advantage in sports in the playoffs. Just delete that last line, and then we'll come back and we'll do the olive branch.
I'm leaving it in. You know that. Come on, man. Come on. Hey, you're the best, Kanell. Appreciate you, brother.
You guys are great. Great being on with you, Teddy, Gabe. Awesome stuff.